Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are strapping in for, well, a really unconventional and, frankly, quite radical exploration. We're looking at the human mind and the reality we think we inhabit.
That's right. Our listener came to us with something many people feel, this sensation that something is fundamentally off in the world, the everyday world.
And the sources we've gathered, they don't just touch on that feeling. They build this entire complex psychological model around it.
Yeah.
It's quite something.
It really is. We're diving into a system that says there are actually two distinct realities operating.
Okay, lay them out for us.
Well, first there's the organic world with a capital W. That's the unpredictable, fluid, real deal. And then there's the lowercase world. This, according to the source, is more like a consensus-based delusion. It's fabricated, driven by anxiety.
Wow, okay. So where does this analysis come from? Not typical psychology, I gather.
No, not at all. It's from the observations of a non-academic individual. Someone who started their search in, well, pretty intense spiritual paths.
Like what?
Everything from Kardec spiritism, apparently, to some rigorous practices in Vajrayana and Theravada Buddhism. A real deep dive into established systems.
That's fascinating. Because the conclusion wasn't what you might expect, right? He didn't land on needing to attain some higher consciousness.
Exactly. He came to realize that higher consciousness, it's actually already here. It's inherent in the structure of our own psyche.
So the work isn't about building towards it.
No, it's about recognizing the structure that already exists, understanding how it functions, and critically understanding the ways we actively obscure it from ourselves.
Right. So our mission today for this deep dive is what exactly?
It's to really get a handle on that organic structure.
Yeah?
We need to focus intently on the machinery of self-deceit. You know, how perception, rejection, and projection work together to create and maintain this false world.
And the sources are pretty clear on one thing.
Yeah.
There's no easy fix, no single formula.
Absolutely. That's a huge point because the nature of our individual psychological setup is unique. You can't just hand over responsibility to some external authority for a cure.
It forces the responsibility back onto us, doesn't it? Back onto you, the learner.
Precisely. The core idea is that the solution has to be entirely individual. We have to take back the psychological reins.
Okay, so where does this model start? What's the philosophical bedrock?
Well, to build this psychological framework, the author first went right back to the biggest question. What is evil? Where does it actually come from?
Okay, fundamental stuff. And that immediately challenges some common ideas, doesn't it? Like duality.
Yes. If you say there's evil, then there must be good, right? But the crucial step here is the assertion that they must share the same origin. They have to come from the same essential source.
Which puts this view at odds with a lot of major belief systems. Systems that like to separate light from dark, good source from evil source.
Definitely. Take Christianity, for instance. The model forces a tough question. If God is the singular, absolute creator, the Gospel of John says, through him all things were made.
Without him, nothing was made that has been made.
Right. So how could God not be responsible for the devil? Even if you argue Lucifer fell by free will, how could a creation choose to oppose its own nature unless that potential for opposition was somehow part of the original design?
It's a paradox baked into the system. And does this critique apply elsewhere? What about Buddhism?
It does. Buddhism often frames evil or suffering as basically ignorance, but the author pushes back. Why would creation manifest as ignorant in the first place? Why not inherently wise?
So these externalized explanations, God versus devil, wisdom versus ignorance, they felt unsatisfying.
Deeply unsatisfying. They always seem to shift the source of the problem outside the original creator or the ultimate truth. That dissatisfaction is what drove the search inward.
And that leads us to the famous poisoned arrow parable from Buddhism.
Yes, the story the Buddha told Malunkaputa, the monk who wanted all the metaphysical answers about the universe right now.
We hear this one a lot, usually to say, just deal with the immediate problem.
Exactly. The Buddha says if a man's shot with a poisoned arrow, you don't stand around asking who shot it, what tribe they were from, what the bow was made of.
You pull the arrow out fast. Emergency care first.
And the author agrees, obviously, immediate action is needed for an immediate threat. But for long-term psychological health, he found that premise lacking.
How so?
Because he argues that not finding out about the archer, the bow, the arrow's nature, well, that leaves you vulnerable. If you don't understand the process that led to the wound, how can you stop another arrow from being fired?
You're just treating the symptom, not the cause.
Precisely. So the search for origins isn't some idle curiosity, as the parable sometimes implies. It's vital. It's essential for self-preservation, for achieving wholeness.
Okay, so this is the pivot. The external solutions, finding a historical Christ, a historical Buddha, weren't enough.
Right. That led to the key realization. These figures, these stories, they aren't just historical. They are symbolic. They're metaphors.
Metaphors for what?
For processes happening within the human psyche, inside us.
Ah, okay. So the focus shifts entirely inward. Does that bring Gnosticism into the picture with the demiurge?
Briefly, yes. Gnosticism seems promising at first glance, right? You have this idea of Yaldabaoth, the false creator, opposing the true father. It feels more internal.
But the author dismisses it too. Why?
Because it still doesn't solve the origin problem, you see. If the demiurge, this flawed creator, came from Sophia, and Sophia emanated from the true God,
Then the true God is still ultimately the source of the potential for flaw, for evil. You're just adding steps.
exactly. It's an infinite regress. It keeps the ultimate responsibility externalized. So this just confirmed for the author that all these figures, father, demiurge, Sophia, they have to be treated as internal metaphors, psychological dynamics.
Which leads to a really core conclusion for this whole model.
Yes, a very powerful one. The cure is hidden within the poison itself.
Say more about that.
The issue, the problem we face, it actually contains its own origin story and its own solution. The goal isn't escape. It's not about getting to heaven or reaching nibbana or breaking free from some cosmic prison built by a demiurge.
Because all those imply leaving something behind, rejecting part of reality.
Yeah, precisely. Heaven means escaping earth. Nibbana means escaping suffering. But if rejection is the root mechanism of the problem, then escape is just another form of rejection, isn't it?
A very elaborate form of self-rejection, maybe.
You got it. So the aim becomes wholeness, comprehensive understanding. We need to understand the mechanisms of the poison because that understanding is the cure.
Okay, so no external source of evil, no escape. We're looking inward. How do we then define the difference between this organic world and the false world that causes the trouble?
Well, that feeling that something is off is almost universal, isn't it? All traditions seem to see existence as some kind of illusion or veil. You have Maya in Hinduism, the Gnostic idea of the material trap. Even 1 John talks about the world being the antithesis of God.
But the author takes issue with the common interpretation of what that world is.
A big issue. He flat out rejects the idea that the world opposing God or spirit is materiality itself.
Why is that distinction so important?
Because if you see matter, the body, physical reality as the enemy, well, you inevitably end up in self-denial, self-rejection. And that completely undermines the goal of wholeness we just talked about.
If you reject the self, you might be cutting off the connection to your own inner source, your essence.
Exactly. So if the world isn't physicality, what is it? The source uses a really vivid analogy here. Gluttony.
Okay, let's break down the gluttony analogy. How does that work?
Right. So hunger. Hunger is just a need, isn't it? It's a prompt from the organic world. Part of being alive, it just is.
Simple enough.
But gluttony. Gluttony isn't really about an addiction to the physical food itself. According to this model, it's the anxiety about hunger. Yeah, the tension. The fear that hunger might be felt again. Or maybe the fear that this amazing flavor you're tasting right now, you might never experience it again. It's about the future, the potential lack.
So the addiction isn't to the food, but to predictability, to avoiding that tension.
That's it. Think about something like financial insecurity. The need for money isn't the core problem. The problem is the anxiety about the future, the unpredictability of whether our needs will be met down the line.
So we hoard this abstract thing, money, to try and buy certainty, permanence.
Exactly. We try to buy our way out of unpredictability. And that inability to cope with the unpredictable nature of existence, that's the root of the false world.
Is there scriptural backing for this focus on anxiety?
There is. Look at Christ's warning in Matthew 6. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink. He connects anxiety directly to serving two masters. You cannot serve both God and money.
And money here isn't just coins or paper.
No, it's the abstract system, the construct built entirely on anxiety about unpredictability. It's an agreement we make to try and regulate access to things, to impose order on the unpredictable flow of life.
So the world that opposes our true nature, our essence, isn't the physical ground beneath our feet. It's the mental constructs, the abstractions the systems we build on top of reality because we can't handle its inherent unpredictability.
You've nailed it. And this anxiety, this tension, this need for control, that's what generates the false world. And the author visualizes this whole process with a really powerful metaphor, the theater metaphor.
Okay, let's walk through the theater metaphor. How does reality turn into delusion?
It starts with the organic world. Imagine it as a completely improvised theater play. It's fluid, spontaneous, unpredictable, performed right out in the open air.
Who are the players?
You have the conductor, that's your individual essential self, your essence, guiding the whole thing.
Okay.
Then you have the actor, that's the individual ego, the true I.
Got it.
And the actor plays the character, that's the mind character, the personality mask we show the world. In this organic state, they're all working together, perfect, harmonious improv.
Sounds ideal, so where does it go wrong? What's the fall?
It starts simply with anxiety. The mind character out front faces something unpredictable, maybe the possibility of failing at something important.
A common experience.
Totally common. But instead of accepting the tension, improvising, trusting the actor and conductor, it rejects the uncertainty. It wants a guaranteed outcome. That rejection is the key moment.
What happens when it rejects?
It generates a shadow. Think of it like a partial projection of the actor's image, but distorted. It represents the desired outcome, the safe self-image built on avoiding the unpredictable thing it just rejected.
Okay, so rejection creates a shadow. Then what?
Then the whole scene changes. The improvised play just stops because the character isn't responding organically anymore. It's frozen, looking at its shadow.
And the stage.
The open stage gets enclosed. These shadows, representing rejected possibilities and desired safeties, they multiply. They dim the natural light, creating this contained artificial environment.
And the play itself transforms.
Yes. The medium shifts. It's no longer live, improvised theater. It becomes scripted cinema.
Ah, a false reality.
Oh.
Scripted, predictable.
Yeah.
The worldview.
Precisely. It's pre-recorded, safe, controllable. The mind character is now trapped inside the self-made movie.
Its connection to the actor and conductor. The ego in essence.
Severed, gone. The character feels lost, abandoned. It feels totally incompetent to act spontaneously anymore.
So what does it do?
It outsources responsibility. It starts looking outside itself for direction. To external authorities, the director of the movie, the critics, the producers, social norms, political leaders, scientific consensus. Anyone who can provide lines for the script.
It conforms to the predictable worldview to feel safe.
Exactly. And what's really striking here is how clearly this defines the true opponent.
It's not Satan, it's not matter.
No, it's internal. It's this shadowy veil, this web of anxiety and need, as the source puts it. That's what takes our innate organic creativity and forces it into safe, predictable molds. It turns living into just automatic role-playing, according to the script.
Okay, that's a powerful image of how the false world gets created. Now, why does this manufactured worldview actually work? Why do we buy into it?
That's the next crucial piece. For this false worldview to gain acceptance, to feel legitimate, it has to mimic the structure of our actual organic psyche.
Like a counterfeit mimicking real currency.
Exactly. It often uses familiar symbolic structures, like the pyramid with the capstone, things that resonate with our deep psychological patterns.
And does this mimicry always involve a certain core belief?
Yes, a foundational one. It always pits humanity against nature. It frames us as somehow separate, external, even alien invaders.
How does that play out?
The underlying philosophy is always, if nature wins, man dies. If man wins, nature dies. There's this inherent conflict. Man is presented as fundamentally outside the organic system.
And this isn't new, is it?
Oh, not at all. This imposed misanthropy, this idea that humans are inherently flawed or dangerous to the natural order, it runs through centuries across totally different belief systems. The source gives 4 classic examples.
Let's hear them.
Okay. In religious stories, you've got God sending the great flood because humanity is corrupt. Man versus God nature.
Right.
In older esoteric systems, there's often talk of the 7 disasters that come if humans fail to follow spiritual laws. Again, human failure leads to natural catastrophe.
Okay.
Then you jump to modern scientism. The story goes that ancient beings, maybe dinosaurs, became obsolete, didn't fit nature's plan, and got wiped out by an asteroid. External force correcting an imbalance, and today. The narrative is often that our disrespect for Mother Nature is causing climate change, which will ultimately destroy us, man's actions causing nature's wrath.
It really is the same script, isn't it? Just different actors and different costumes. God, spiritual laws, asteroids, climate change.
Absolutely. Whether it's religious or supposedly scientific, the underlying message is consistent. Man is external to nature, inherently problematic, and needs external control, discipline, or, in extreme versions, elimination.
And psychologically, what does setting up man as separate achieve?
It creates a vacuum. If we're convinced we're fundamentally alienated from the natural organic order, including our own inner nature, our essence,
Hmm.
then we lose trust in our internal authority. That opens the door for an external replacement authority to step in and fill the void. The script needs a director.
Okay. Before we get into the components of that internal authority, the organic psyche, you mentioned something about terminology and inversion.
Yes, this is absolutely key. The author argues that to understand the true hierarchy of authority within us, we need to basically flip the terms used in traditional academic psychology.
Flip them. How? This sounds like a major shift.
It is. We need to be really clear here. In this model, what we traditionally call the subconscious, that's actually the conscious mind, with a capital C.
Wait, the subconscious is the conscious.
Yes, because it's higher in authority. It holds vastly more knowledge. Think about the word conscientia with knowledge. This is the deep background system. It contains things like the memory room, the throne room, the core operating system.
Okay. So if that's the conscious, then what's the traditional conscious mind? Our waking awareness.
In this model, that's the subconscious. Lowercase s's, it's lower in authority, has access to less knowledge overall. It's where our direct, moment-to-moment sentience lives, our perception of the outside world. It's more like the user interface.
Wow. So the shocking implication is our normal everyday waking life, the part we think of as us, is actually less conscious, less knowledgeable than the deeper structures.
That's exactly the implication. Our rational waking mind is just the tip of the iceberg, riding on top of this vast conscious foundation containing the ego and the essence.
That distinction is huge. Okay, so let's define the ultimate source then. The highest authority in this flipped model, the essence.
Right. The essence is, well, it's the entire potential for your unique individuality.
Well.
It's the unmanifested source code, if you like. An organic blueprint containing all of the timeless archetypes, your specific vocations, your inherent traits.
And it's unchanging.
It's immutable, intangible. It represents absolute truth for you. The perfect original design plan that generates your entire psychological field. It doesn't change based on your beliefs or experiences.
So it's like the equivalent of the Father in Christianity whose state is heaven, or Dharma in Buddhism leading to Nibbana, or maybe the fundamental laws of nature in scientism.
Precisely. It just is, regardless of how we perceive it. And that feeling we sometimes get, vocational frustration, feeling like you're on the wrong path in life.
Yeah.
According to this model, that feeling comes directly from your mind character trying to follow a cultural script, the worldview, that clashes with the specific blueprint laid out in your essence.
Okay, so essence is the ultimate source.
Yeah.
What's the next level down, mediating between essence and our everyday mind?
That's the ego. And we need to be careful here because ego gets a bad rap. But in this model, the ego is the legitimate authority. It's the true self.
The true self, not the enemy.
It's not at all. The ego, from the Latin I, or me, is the only part of the psyche directly connected to the essence. It's designed to be the incorruptible decision center. It's the reality filter. And it's the source of true will.
Define will in this context. It's not just wanting something.
No, not mere desire. Will is an internal, individual decision that is then put into action. It flows directly from the essence through the ego.
And where does the ego reside, metaphorically?
In what the author calls the throne room.
Yeah.
It sits right between the deep conscious, where the essence is rooted, and the subconscious, where the mind characters operate.
The throne room implies rulership, authority.
Exactly. And metaphorically, the ego is the internal Christ. The self with a capital S.
The internal Christ. Okay, that's a potent image.
It is. And the source draws a direct parallel using that famous line from John 14. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me.
So the ego is the way, back to the essence, the Father. It's the source of truth that cuts through the false worldviews. And it's the source of authentic psychological life.
That's the interpretation. The ego is the sole gateway to our own inherent truth and potential.
That's a powerful metaphor. But using Christ like that, it carries a lot of historical and religious weight. How does the source prevent this from just becoming another external belief system, just internalized?
By stressing constantly that this is purely metaphorical. It's about an internal function, not a historical person you worship. And crucially, the model points out how the collective worldview, the scripted cinema, must attack and silence the ego to maintain its control.
How does it attack the ego?
Think about the gospel story. Christ is mocked, spat upon, betrayed, especially by Judas Iscariot. Judas, in this metaphor, represents the mind character that has become addicted to the false world, obsessed with greed, security of the script.
So the mind character, seduced by the false world, hands over the true authority, the ego, to the representatives of external power, the priests, the governors.
Exactly. The goal of the false worldview is always to silence the legitimate internal authority, the ego, because the ego threatens the predictable script by asserting individual will and truth.
Okay. The ego is the filter, the decision maker. What does it filter? Where does information get stored?
That happens in the memory room. This is also located in the conscious realm, conceptually above the throne room. It's the neutral storage space for everything, all information, experiences, knowledge.
Including false information.
Yes, critically, including false beliefs and corrupted data. It just stores what comes in.
So what's the ego's role regarding the memory room in a healthy psyche?
In a healthy state, the ego acts as the librarian, the filter before things get stored permanently. It analyzes incoming experiences. For example, it hears a loud bang. Is it thunder, natural event, or is it, say, God's wrath, a belief imposed by a specific worldview?
It distinguishes objective reality from interpretation.
Right. It evaluates the data before filing it. And importantly, it also periodically goes back through the stored memories and reevaluates them. Is this old belief still valid based on new experience and insight?
But what happens if the ego is bypassed? If the connection is severed, like in the theater metaphor?
Then the mind character's analysis takes over, or worse, the analysis of the external representative lodged in the backstage. That neutral event, thunder, might get instantly logged as proof of God's anger based purely on the prevailing script.
And the memory room gets filled with corrupted data.
Precisely. If the ego is muted, incoming facts aren't checked against reality or internal truth. They're just accepted if they fit the current worldview. You end up with a collective memory built on unchecked belief, not objective analysis, which perfectly serves the scripted cinema.
All right, let's move down into the subconscious then, the realm of our waking awareness. Who lives there?
That's the domain of the mind characters. These are the personality masks we wear, the task and objective-oriented programs.
It's like software programs.
Sort of, yeah. The ego generates them specifically to interact with the external world, to perform roles on the front stage of life. Think social interaction modes, professional personas, routines, managers.
But they're limited.
Very limited in their perception. They're designed for specific functions, and they really need the ego's broader wisdom and connection to essence to operate without falling into error or delusion. They are not the true I.
So they're useful tools, but they aren't the core self.
Exactly. Now, what happens when that ego connection gets cut? We talked about anxiety and rejection causing this.
The mind character feels lost, right?
Huh?
A vacuum.
Yes, and it desperately tries to fill that vacuum. It can't access the internal authority, so it searches for external substitutes, ego surrogates.
The directors, the critics from the theater metaphor.
Precisely. It forms these psychological representatives of a collective authority figures, maybe a charismatic cult leader, a trusted doctor, a political ideology, even a scientific theory like germ theory. And these representatives take up residence in the backstage of the subconscious.
The backstage, so behind the scenes of our conscious awareness.
Kind of pulling the strings, yes. And this mechanism, this lodging of an external authority figure in the backstage, is seen as the root of many psychological pathologies.
Such as?
Well, the source defines things like demonic possession or stories of alien abduction or even culture-based syndromes as extreme forms of this. They're delusions where a powerful representative of a collective worldview has become deeply embedded, often triggered by trauma or extreme vulnerability, like in dissociative identity disorder.
Do you give an example? Maybe the culture-bound syndromes?
Mm-hmm.
How do they illustrate this?
They're a perfect illustration.
Yeah.
The source uses the example of germophobia and compares it directly to historical demon possession.
How are they comparable?
Think about it. In both cases, the person is dealing with an unseen, overwhelming, abstract threat, germs, or demons. They feel powerless. So what do? They defer completely to an external authority figure who claims to understand and combat this unseen threat. That's the doctor with antibiotics and hygiene protocols, or the exorcist with rituals and prayers.
And the authority figure provides the expected remedy based on the prevailing worldview.
Exactly. And here's the crucial part. This process confirms the collective's beliefs and Importantly, it grants the suffering individual social acceptance, membership.
Ah, so by having the correct culturally recognized problem and seeking the correct cure, the person gets validated.
Yes. Their suffering, even if self-induced or psychologically generated, is now validated by the authorities of that worldview. The fear of the unseen threat, combined with reliance on the authority figure, gives the mind character what it desperately craves: cognitive closure and social belonging. It locks them firmly into the scripted cinema.
And this reliance just paralyzes any real individual thought or analysis.
Completely. The mind character becomes solely focused on following the rules of the collective script to maintain that feeling of safety and belonging. It stops pursuing the unpredictable individual will of the ego altogether.
Okay, so this dependence is basically the shadow we talked about earlier, manifesting as reliance on external authorities. But you also mentioned a feedback loop involving projection and reflection.
Oh, yes. The shadow mechanism itself is dynamic. It involves a constant interplay between projecting outward and reality reflecting back.
How does that work in a healthy state?
In a healthy psyche, the ego prompts the mind character. The mind character then projects its authentic individuality out onto the world. The world, the organic world, then acts like a mirror.
It reflects back.
Yes, it provides feedback. Maybe synchronous events happen, maybe answers appear seemingly out of nowhere. It's a balanced projection and reflection. You put out authentic energy, reality responds in kind.
Okay, but what happens when it's unhealthy? When the mind character rejects the ego's will, like staying in that soul-crushing job out of fear.
Right, that act of rejection, choosing fear and predictability over the ego's authentic impulse, generates an artificial construct. This is the projected shadow.
So it's like projecting a false self.
Exactly. It's a surrogate guide built entirely on a manufactured self-image designed for safety and security. It's fundamentally unaligned with the ego's truth. It's basically a lie about who you are, projected outward.
And how does the world respond to this projected lie?
The external world, still acting as a mirror, reflects this projected shadow back. This creates what the source calls a reflected shadow, and this reflection inevitably conflicts with the false self-image being projected.
Conflict, negative feedback, like reality is saying, nope, that's not who you really are.
Precisely. And this negative feedback, this dissonance, should be a signal. It should alert the individual that they're misaligned, prompting them to reconnect with the ego for correction.
But it usually doesn't work that way, does it? Why not?
Because this is where the system, the false worldview, has its safety nets in place. It anticipates this internal conflict, this stress.
And it offers relief, distraction.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It offers appeasers. Entertainment, hobbies, addictions, rituals, chemical comforts, endless scrolling, anything to alleviate the discomfort of that conflict between the projected lie and the reflected truth.
Like a pressure release valve.
A psychological pressure release valve. It stops the anxiety from becoming overwhelming, which crucially prevents the mind character from hitting a crisis point where it might be forced to abandon the script and seek the ego again.
So the conflict, instead of leading to correction, gets managed.
Dampened. Yes, but here's the really counterintuitive part. The conflict doesn't just get dampened, it actually becomes self-feeding. It strengthens the shadow.
How can conflict strengthen the thing causing it? That sounds backward.
The source explains this with a really effective analogy. Regenerative braking, like in hybrid cars, or maybe thinking of it as stretching a rubber band.
Okay, explain the rubber band analogy.
Right. The initial rejection of the ego's will, deciding to stay in the bad job, for instance, that's the initial motion. Stretching the rubber band. The projected shadow is the force moving forward.
Got it.
Now, when that projected shadow meets resistance, the negative feedback from the reflected shadow, the conflict, reality pushing back, that's like hitting the brakes or pulling the rubber band even tighter.
Okay.
But here's the key. Like regenerative braking stores energy when the car slows down. This psychological braking, this conflict, doesn't dissipate the energy, it stores it within the shadow system. The tension in the rubber band increases.
So the conflict actually powers up the shadow, makes the rejection stronger.
Exactly. That's why when someone deeply invested in a false position under the shadow's influence faces contradictory evidence or conflict, what do they usually do?
They often dig in harder.
Get defensive.
Double down.
Precisely. They react with outrage, denial, increased rigidity. Because the conflict itself is feeding energy back into the shadow structure, making their false position feel even more necessary, more charged. It accelerates their reliance on the false worldview.
Okay, hold on. If conflict always feeds the shadow, that sounds like a trap with no escape. How could any genuine change or confrontation ever work? Wouldn't that imply we should just avoid all conflict?
That is the critical question, isn't it? And the answer lies in how the conflict is met. The conflict only feeds the shadow when the mind character's response is unconscious. Automatic when they just react, double down, get defensive without awareness.
So awareness changes the dynamic.
Awareness is the potential game changer, but the cycle of conflict feeding the shadow often continues unconsciously, building and building that internal tension. The rubber band stretches further and further until it reaches its absolute limit.
And
then it snaps.
it snaps. What does that look like psychologically?
This is what the source calls the tower moment. Think of the tarot card. It's an irrevocable, inescapable defeat. A total collapse of the false structure. The projected self-image is shattered. The internal representative of the false worldview is obliterated.
Rock bottom.
Absolute psychological rock bottom. Everything you thought was true or safe is just gone.
Sounds terrifying, but also maybe an opportunity.
A unique and often terrifying opportunity, yes, because in that moment of complete destruction of the false, there is a sudden, stark opening, a chance to reconnect with the silenced ego.
How does that reconnection happen?
It requires a kind of psychological death. The old dependent mind character, the one run by the script in the shadow, has to metaphorically die. It has to let go completely.
And be reborn.
Yes. In the Christian metaphor used by the source, this is being born again, but not of the flesh, meaning the old worldview, the script, but born again of the spirit, meaning the ego, the authentic individuality, the connection to essence.
So it's not about fighting the shadow directly.
No. That just feeds it, remember. The mind character has to become an internal iconoclast. It has to shatter the false idol, the representative lodged in the backstage, through realization, through seeing the script for what it is, not through external violence or more conflict, because that just tightens the rubber band again.
Okay, this is a really detailed internal model. How does it apply to the world around us? To collective events?
That's the next step. We take this psychological blueprint and apply it to the collective sphere, starting with history.
History as the collective what?
As the collective memory room. Just like the individual ego should filter memories for truth before storage, history, ideally, should filter collective events and facts for accuracy.
But does it?
Well, the source argues not really. History is presented as objective, but it's inherently subjective, isn't it? It's always filtered.
Filtered by whom?
By the shadow representatives on a collective scale. Historians, educators, media outlets, institutions. The very people whose authority often depends on upholding the consensus worldview.
So history becomes less about objective fact and more about reinforcing the dominant script.
Largely, yes. It becomes an exercise in belief. You have to trust the mediating sources, the validating authorities, and those authorities are almost always intertwined with maintaining the current iteration of the false world.
How is this collective delusion maintained over time?
The source points to a powerful two-pronged approach, perfectly described by two famous dystopian novels.
Which ones?
Orwell's 1984 and Huxley's Brave New World.
Ah, control through pain and control through pleasure.
Exactly. The false worldview is maintained by active curation and constant rewriting of the past, just like in Orwell's Ministry of Truth.
Yeah.
But it's combined with passive mass distraction and appeasement, the endless entertainment, drugs, and conditioning of Huxley's world.
So lies are actively fed while we're simultaneously numb so we don't care enough to question them.
That's the combination, and modern mass media is the perfect engine for this.
Why media specifically?
Because it eliminates the interval needed for analysis. News reports, images, expert opinions, they're presented instantly, often validated by the reporters themselves or designated fact-checkers who are part of the same system.
There's no time for the ego to step in and filter.
Very little. This immediacy is actively promoted. It allows pre-packaged narratives, the scripts, to be injected directly into the collective memory room before the collective mind character even have a chance to question the source or the framing. It becomes historical fact in real time.
Okay, this is theoretical. Can we see this mechanism in action in a real-world event?
Absolutely. The source uses a very recent, very impactful example as a case study,
Yeah.
the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020-2022.
Right, a huge global event. How does the source analyze it using this psychological model?
It presents it as a textbook case. A demonstration of how an imposed belief system, in this instance, scientism, presented as objective truth, can enforce a massive coordinated delusion on a global scale. It argues that it used the exact mechanisms of anxiety, rejection, shadow projection, and reliance on external representatives that we've just outlined.
Okay, let's tread carefully here, sticking just to how the source applies its model.
Yeah.
Where does the analysis begin?
It argues the psychological groundwork was laid years before, pointing to things like a 2006 U.S. Department of Homeland Security report.
What did that report say?
It was titled something like "Fear of Terrorist Attack Could Trigger Mass Psychogenic Illness." The source sees this as establishing the official possibility of a mass-scale culture-bound syndrome, the idea that collective fear of an unseen threat could cause widespread, psychologically induced physical symptoms.
So priming the collective mind character to accept that possibility.
It's at the argument. And then the chosen instrument for triggering the delusion, according to this analysis, the PCR test.
Why the PCR test?
Because of its inherent nature, it could provide the illusion of a measurable objective threat while being, the source argues, easily manipulated based on cycle thresholds. They quote Kerry Mullis, the inventor of PCR, who himself apparently expressed concerns.
What was his concern?
That if you run enough cycles, you can find almost anything in anybody. And using it to diagnose illness based just on finding fragments could be a misuse.
Also, the source sees the test as the perfect tool to generate the appearance of a pandemic, regardless of the actual clinical reality for many.
Yes, to create the necessary mass hysteria and potentially self-induced symptoms, essentially, a global culture-bound syndrome, but with doctors and scientists acting as the authority figures, the exorcists instead of priests.
And was there pre-programming, according to the source?
Relentless pre-programming. It points to simulated scenarios like the SPARS pandemic exercise in 2017, and especially Event 201 in October 2019.
Event 201 involved major global health players, didn't it?
Yes, simulating a coronavirus pandemic just months before the real thing. The source views these not as preparation, but as dress rehearsals, providing the script, the cues, the predictable responses for governments and media, ensuring the public would react along pre-planned lines, locking in the narrative beforehand.
So the script was written in advance.
That's the assertion. And the moment the curtain officially rose, March 11th, 2020.
The WHO declaration.
Yes. The source frames the WHO Director General metaphorically as the WHO Pope, the supreme religious figurehead of this particular scientism-based worldview. His declaration was the authoritative word.
And governments worldwide fell in line immediately.
Almost universally, yes. Instantly adopting the script, establishing the new global shadow authority, overriding normal procedures in many cases.
What followed then, according to this analysis? Was it real crisis management or something else?
The source describes it as a massive, expensive performance, a virtual scenario staged for the global audience.
What are the examples given of this performance?
Things like the rapid, almost unreviewed publication of key scientific papers, like the Corman-Drosten paper on PCR testing. Also, the use of manufactured imagery in the media, alleged forgeries of overwhelmed hospitals, documented use of mannequins in place of patients, viral videos of hospital staff performing choreographed dances during supposed peak crisis moments.
Set design and questionable acting in the scripted cinema.
That's exactly how it's framed. And the compliance, the source argues, was so widespread because the shadow mechanism demands it. The irrational rules like needing a mask only when standing up in a restaurant but not sitting down, these weren't about logic.
What were they about then?
Ritual. Ritualized behaviors enforced by intense peer pressure and fear. The mask itself became less a tool and more a symbol, an outward sign of accepting the imposed faith, the script. It turned participation in the worldview into a massive, mandatory live-action role-playing game.
And if you didn't play along, didn't wear the symbol,
you were cast out. Labeled as dangerous, selfish, a source of unpredictability in a system desperately craving certainty, that social pressure is immense.
Okay, this is a very specific, critical interpretation of events. To help the listener evaluate such claims about any event, does the source offer any practical tools?
Yes. It utilizes a checklist developed by researcher Team Osman called the 12 hoax indicators. These aren't proof in themselves, but flags suggesting an event might be more staged or manipulated than organic. The source then applies these 12 indicators to the COVID-19 narrative to support its case.
Okay, let's go through the 12 indicators, applying them as the source does to COVID, purely as an illustration of the model. What's indicator 1?
Indicator 1, ready to implement political agendas. The argument is that the pandemic immediately facilitated sweeping regulations, bypassing normal democratic processes, and directly led to initiatives like the proposed WHO pandemic agreement aimed at centralizing global health powers. The psychological lever, the collective mind character, overwhelmed by fear, craves quick solutions. A prepackaged problem-reaction solution bypasses the need for slow, critical ego analysis.
Okay, indicator 2.
Crisis actors. The source points to numerous documented instances of individuals giving interviews as patients or medical staff whose stories didn't add up, seemed performative, or cases where mannequins were clearly used in news footage, the psychological lever. Our subconscious relies heavily on immediate visual input. If an authority source, like the news, shows proof of suffering, the mind character tends to accept it, even if the performance is poor.
Indicator 3.
Relevant concurrent programming. We mentioned the Netflix docs. The source highlights the specific timing, for example, the finale of a TV series called Outbreak airing the day before the WHO pandemic declaration. The psychological lever. This is pre-programming. It plants the emotional tone and visual script in the collective memory room, making the real event feel familiar and expected, reinforcing the predictability the mind character seeks.
Indicator 4.
Concurrent drills. Event 201 is the prime example here, rehearsing the exact types of responses and messaging that global bodies and governments later implemented, the psychological lever. Rehearsal ensures coordination among the representatives, politicians, media, health officials, and smooths out the natural chaos and confusion of a truly unpredictable crisis. It makes it feel scripted.
Indicator 5.
Celebrity involvement. Widespread promotion of the narrative, the lockdowns, the masks, and later the vaccines by musicians, actors, influencers, and politicians. The psychological lever. Celebrities function as trusted, pre-established representatives for many mind characters. Their endorsement leverages herd mentality and social modeling. If they believe it, maybe I should too.
Indicator 6.
Perpetrator reference other questionable events. The source argues that the COVID-19 narrative deliberately invoked fear by linking it to previous scares like bird flu, swine flu, SARS, even HIV/AIDS events whose severity or origins were also debated. The psychological lever. This taps into established fear patterns. It fits the invisible, deadly pathogen stereotype, striking a familiar, pre-approved emotional chord in the collective psyche.
Indicator 7.
Deviations from standard protocol. This includes things like law enforcement making arrests for breaking mandates that weren't actual laws, bypassing established legal procedures, or the medical field bypassing rigorous peer review for key papers or fast-tracking approvals without long-term data. The psychological lever. Creating a sense of unprecedented emergency that justifies overriding normal rules convinces the mind character the threat must be enormous, thus silencing the ego's demand for rational process and legal grounding.
Indicator 8.
Event unfolds according to a predictable template. The response largely mirrored the scripts rehearsed in simulations like Event 201, the psychological lever. Predictability reinforces the shadow's authority. If the world behaves exactly as the script predicted, the mind character's anxiety is temporarily calmed, validating the external authority that provided the script.
Indicator 9.
Triggers a perfectly bifurcated response. The situation instantly created two opposing camps. The pro-compliance side and the anti-restriction skeptic side, with each group heavily encouraged to scapegoat the other. The psychological lever. This channels the conflict outward. Remember the rubber band effect. By giving people external enemies to fight, the anti-vaxxers, the mass Karens, the energy of the internal conflict, dissonance with the narrative, gets projected outward. This prevents individuals from hitting their internal breaking point and questioning the whole script.
Indicator 10.
Disproportionate attention. This one seems obvious. The pandemic narrative dominated global news cycles almost exclusively for well over a year, pushing aside nearly all other major world events. The psychological lever. Information saturation. It simply overwhelms the subconscious processing capacity, forcing compliance through sheer volume and removing mental space to consider contradictory information or alternative perspectives.
Indicator 11.
Goaded into participation. Strong social pressure and virtue signaling were attached to compliance, wearing masks, getting vaccinated, publicly shaming dissenters. This created social heroes, frontline workers, compliant citizens, and martyrs, those who suffered from defying the rules. The psychological lever. This plays directly on the mind character's deepest fear, social exclusion. Participation becomes mandatory for psychological safety within the group, overriding individual logic or ego-based intuition.
And the final one, Indicator 12.
Scooby-Doo justice. The source uses this term to describe how the culprit, whether bat soup in a wet market or a lab leak, was identified and promoted very early on, often before the pandemic was even officially declared. The psychological lever. Instantly identifying the bad guy serves to cement the central premise that the threat, as described, is real right from the start. It prevents the ego from asking more fundamental questions about whether the event is even happening as portrayed, because the whodunit is already solved.
So, according to the source's analysis, using these indicators, The COVID event ticked all the boxes, serving as a large-scale demonstration of these psychological mechanisms.
That's the argument presented, yes. That it showed how an imposed belief system, using anxiety, shadow projection, external authorities, and carefully managed conflict, could enforce a massive coordinated delusion by perfectly exploiting the vulnerabilities of the individual psyche when disconnected from its own ego.
We've covered a huge amount of ground here, journeying through a really intricate and challenging psychological model.
Yeah.
It definitely demands a lot of personal reflection. Let's try to summarize the key takeaways.
Okay. The core architecture, remember, is flipped from the usual understanding. Your ego is the legitimate, true authority connected to your essence. It resides in the conscious, the deeper, more knowledgeable part of you.
In our waking life, the subconscious is actually less knowledgeable and much more easily influenced by external scripts, the false world.
Exactly. And that false world mechanism, it's driven entirely by anxiety. Specifically, anxiety about the organic world's inherent unpredictability.
That anxiety leads to rejection of the ego's authentic will or guidance.
Which in turn generates the shadow, the false self, the reliance on external scripts and authorities. And conflict with that shadow, paradoxically, just feeds its power through that rubber band effect, locking us into these predictable, often soul-crushing control systems.
So the conclusion. It loops right back to the beginning, doesn't it?
That's game.
There's no magic pill, no external fix.
No collective solution whatsoever. The source is adamant. Change must happen at the individual level. It starts with accepting unpredictability as just part of life, a necessary part of organic existence. We have to find a balance between that natural flow and the necessary routines of life.
And it means consciously taking back the psychological responsibility we've outsourced.
Taking it back from those external representatives, yes. This requires the mind character, hopefully now informed by the ego, to become an internal iconoclast.
Iconoclast, a breaker of idols.
An internal one, yes. Shattering the false idols of the worldview, the representatives lodged in the backstage. But, and this is crucial, shattering them through realization, through understanding the script, not through more external conflict or violence, because that just feeds the shadow cycle all over again.
So the goal isn't to fight the theater, but to step outside it.
To stand outside the scripted cinema and just observe the play for what it is. Recognize it as a predictable performance designed solely to manage anxiety.
What kind of stance does that require from the individual?
A stance grounded in the quiet certainty of the reconnected ego. And the source concludes with a final provocative thought that perfectly captures this state. It's from the Romanian poet Mihai Eminescu from his 1883 poem, Glosa.
Let's hear it.
Have no hope and have no fear. Waves that rise can never hold. If they urge or if they cheer, you remain aloof and cold.
Aloof and cold. That sounds detached.
Detached from the drama of the false world, yes. Not cold emotionally, perhaps, but unmoved by the push and pull of the script's artificial hopes and fears. That aloofness, that inner stillness, is the state of individual wholeness, according to this model. It's independent of the external theater.
It's the realization that the ego, your true self connected to essence, is ultimately untouchable by the script.
Exactly. That recognition itself is the end of the imposed delusion's power over you.
Thank you for joining us on this very deep dive. We hope this exploration gives you, the listener, some tools and maybe some courage to trust your own inner authority a bit more, and perhaps start looking for the shadow script playing out in your own life.